Okay, thanks everyone. I mean, my introduction with machine learning and NLP, I don't think people even say NLP these days. Um, uh, this work I'm presenting today is actually a collaboration with political scientists. So it's actually computational social science, what you would call. We're interested in lobbying. Uh, so this Jisun, one of my PhD students, is the main person who did this work. I'm just here to present. Oh, well, okay. So we're now talking about the legislative process in the US. And I don't know how it is in Canada, but we're talking about the US Congress where you first somebody introduces a bill into Congress, either the House or the sorry. Right, or Senate, and then the Congress, the House or the Senate goes through certain processes, and then they vote on it, and then sometimes the president vetoes it, and then it does or does not become law. So it's kind of a long and complex process, and all of this data, like which bills are introduced, how people vote on it, how the Congress votes on it is publicly available. So all of the world pretty much can see what actually happens. And this data can be used to really analyze, try to analyze what's going on underneath the whole complex uh, process. And but the problem is that there's a lot of sort of hidden stuff that the data do not actually provide explicitly. So if you can actually use some machine learning to uncover what's actually going on underneath, like what is not explicitly stated in the data, then you can have a more sort of deeper understanding of what's happening. So this work I'm presenting today is one example of trying to uncover like what is going on like in these hidden connections. So lobbying is important in the US, and I actually live in Korea. So we don't actually, in Korea, lobbying is not legal, but in the US, people actually do it legally. And here's one example of campaign donations is one sort of important part of lobbying. And we know last year when Donald Trump won the presidential election, Elon Musk donated a lot of money. And so, you know, I'll skip through all the details, $140 million actually. And and then Elon Musk did some stuff for the government. And we talked about how humans are irrational, and maybe this is one example. So this is an extreme case, but this type of lobbying goes on. Like there's a lot of lobbying that goes on in US politics. Let's talk about the legislative process and how lobbying has a role there. So let's, for example, talk about this bill that talks about reclassifying potatoes from vegetable to grain. And somebody proposes bill because if you think about the perspective of providing healthy food for students in school, if you classify potatoes, whether you classify them as vegetables versus grain, it could have a pretty large effect on school kids' health. And so somebody proposed that bill, but then like the farmers or some potato council lobbied against it, and so this bill was rejected and did not become law. And so the point of this is that lobbying, like all this legislative stuff, is actually really important to all of the citizens of the US. So there's data available on these lobbying activities, but what is missing from a lot of these lobbying reports is whether these interest groups are in support or in opposition of the bills that they're lobbying. So let me show you I'll skip through some of these. So we try to, in this paper or in this research, we try to sort of make or sort of uncover these legislative preferences of the interest groups, and then provide like a really wide and comprehensive coverage using LLMs pretty much. Because before, like in previous work, people did look at lobbying activities and try to classify whether interest groups are lobbying in support or opposition, but they did it only, political scientists usually work with very small like data sets compared to what we work with in this machine learning field. So this is what a lobbying report looks like. So and every interest group, if they do some lobbying activity, they're required by law to file these lobbying reports quarterly. So, like Apple Computer, Microsoft, all these companies, you can actually just look them up and look at all of the lobbying activities that they've done. So there's the interest group name, some kind of description of the lobbying activity, which sometimes lists the specific bills, sometimes they don't. And then who they actually use as the lobbyists. So what we did is, so the political scientist we worked with at MIT, he built this data set called LobbyView, which is just a digitized data set of all of the lobbying reports from, I don't know, like early 2000s or so. So what we did is we took the data set of lobbying reports, we did the annotations, through LLM to classify what for each lobbying activity, whether that interest group is in support or opposition of the bill that they're lobbying for, or sometimes certain topics, not specific bills. And then we use graphical neural networks to predict the unspecified ones. So if you look at some of the lobbying reports, they'll say, we're in support of this bill, but then sometimes they say we're lobbying for this bill, and it doesn't really say like whether it's support or lobby. So in those cases, we use GNNs to predict what they're doing. So the lobbying activity actually isn't just support and oppose. There's also amend and monitor. And monitor actually is the largest in terms of frequency. So that means interest groups are just looking at what's going on with the bills, not necessarily like explicitly supporting or opposing. So if you look at the lobbying issues text in the middle there, they'll say things like we're in endorsement, we're lobbying to defeat, we're advocating, things like that. So this is, as you can see, the language is pretty diverse. So this is where LLMs come in, because LLMs are very good at saying like, oh, this, like looking at the text and doing the classification. But then, as I said, a lot of the times the text doesn't actually say one way or another. So we do all of this. So we look at the text, we use LLMs to classify, and then for cases where LLMs cannot classify, we use GNNs. And the reason GNNs work well is that you have this really huge network of the interest groups, which are either corporations or they can be like citizen groups, or like organizations that represent certain industries. And then we have the lobbyists, and then we have the politicians. So they're all like sort of linked through these lobbying reports. Right. So in terms of the accuracy, so the LLMs, like when the text specifies whether there's support or oppose, the LLMs are very accurate. It's like 98% accuracy. But then the GNN accuracy is a little bit less, as you can see. I mean, this task is a little bit noisier and more difficult for GNNs to do the prediction. And so we have this. So other people have done human annotation, like of a small set of lobbying reports to see whether they're opposing or supporting or amending or monitoring. And so using GNNs, we get an accuracy of about 78%. So we do this with 279,000 bill positions. 12,000 interest groups covering from 2009 to 2022. So that's what the data set looks like. And all of this data set is actually available, I think, on GitHub. The paper itself it's under review, but we have it on archive as well. So some of the analysis that we did, like after we did all this, classification of the positions, you can see, sorry, the font is really small. The first one that that has the red box, the second one from the top is the abortion policy or anti-abortion interest group, like anti-abortion group. What this means is within the entire data set, they tend to support the really conservative policies or bills and then oppose the liberal policies. And then you can see at the very bottom here, the abortion advocacy groups sort of on the other side. And so you can see this. So what we did is we took the interest groups, we grouped them, like cluster them using like the different industries or different sort of topic areas. And then we looked at the lobbying positions. So whether they're lobbying sort of for the progressive agendas or versus the conservative agendas. And so here's some other examples of analyses that we did that you can, so after you do all this classification, you can do like analysis of what's actually going on in the in terms of what the interest groups are doing. And so these figures C and D are showing for specific bills. So this bill in the 115th Congress for protecting seniors' access to Medicare Act of 2017. And you can see, so the green dots mean that they're supporting this bill. And so all across, like regardless of the lobbying position score, so like if the lobbying positions score is in the negative, it's kind of arbitrary, but they're like the progressive position, and then in the positive, it's the conservative position. So the health professionals, abortion, or I'm sorry, the other way around. So the anti-abortion groups, as well as the progressive health professionals, they're all in support of this particular bill for improved access. But then this other bill, it is the bill called Stop the War on Coal Act of 2012. As you can see, it's like let's use coal more. This happened in 2012, and you can see the conservative groups in support, and then the environment groups, for example, like environment and human rights groups are lobbying in opposition of this particular bill. And so we have like, these are just two examples of the bills. And once you have classified the support or oppose positions of these interest groups and interest groups, then you can do this type of analysis. So and some more examples of the, a lot of these analyses are done by the political scientists in our research group. And so what I'm showing pretty much is that, before, what political scientists would do is look at like each bill or like each interest group and do this at a very small scale. But they were really surprised that, by using LLMs and GNNs, you can actually do this at a very much larger scale. So you can ask these questions, or for example, like how are bill positions aligned with interest groups' preferences? How does the firm size, so when you look at the private sector, the size of the firm, how does that shape the lobbying strategies? And then how do the lobbying strategies affect the passage of the bills? So like this is a very sort of macro view. So if you look at all of the interest groups, the ones that are like have the high lobbying scores, so these are the progressive groups, they are in support of the bills that are also the bills that represent the progressive view. And the opposite is true of the opposition, so the lobbying in opposition of the bill, and then engage, which is the combination of amend and monitor. It's sort of agnostic as to the lobbying position. So the firm size, how does the firm size shape the lobbying strategy? So this is another I guess, sort of hypothesis that the political scientists have had for a long time. So if you're, as the firms are larger, the larger firms just lobby a lot more. So what the x-axis shows here is the difference between the 90th percentile firm and the 10th percentile firm in terms of the size, like their revenue, whatever. And so you do see that difference is very large in terms of the overall amount of lobbying. So the larger firms do lobby a lot more. And they also, among the 4 different lobbying activities, they monitor the bills more than the smaller size firms. And that shows basically, they have the funding because you need to have money to do the lobbying. So they have the excess money to be monitoring these bills. Whereas the smaller firms tend to, the difference is very small, like between the larger firms and the small firms in terms of like lobbying to specifically support or oppose the bills. Right. So this confirms that the firm size shapes the lobbying decisions and the strategic lobbying positions. So this figure shows how the lobbying strategies affect whether the bills are passed. So what we should first look at are, so the red ones are the support and the green ones are the green ones are the support and red ones are opposed. And this shows you like the red ones are on sort of the negative side, means when interest groups lobby against bills, the bill passage, the probability of the bill being passed, it does become lower. So, this is just sanity check that lobbying works. But we're looking at the 90th percentile of the bills in terms of the amount of lobbying. So the ones at the top are like the bills where there's a lot of lobbying activity going on, and the 10th percentile, very little, like let's say like five groups lobbying, as opposed to this 90th percentile, it's something like 100 different groups lobbying either for or against this bill. So you can see, so among the green, so meaning like lobbying to support the bill, this one at the bottom is the largest, meaning when there is little lobbying activity going on, if you're actually supporting or if you're lobbying to support the bill gets passed more, like the difference is larger. If there's a lot of lobbying activity going on, if you lobby to support, it doesn't really make any difference. So, but then the opposite is true for the opposed. So if there's a lot of activity, lobbying activity, opposition kind of works, but relatively less so for the little activity. So that's also interesting. So it tells us that lobbying strategies do influence the legislative outcomes, and it depends on like how active these lobbying activities are. Okay, so I'm going to summarize my talk here, and we may have some time for questions. So we're really excited to do this work with the political scientists because we can have a much more comprehensive look at what's actually going on in this legislative process and how lobbying plays a role in the U.S. legislation process. And we're kind of skeptical at first with using GNNs because the data is so noisy. there's like thousands of or tens of thousands of lobbyists and Congress members of the Congress involved in this entire thing. Or okay, not tens of thousands of interest groups, and then thousands of politicians and lobbyists involved in this really messy network. But it does look like it does look promising to use LLMs and GNNs to do this, computational political science. Yeah, and we're going to look at other data as well. So campaign donations, which we started out with at the beginning of the talk. There's all kinds of, like, it turns out political scientists do have access to a lot of data. They just haven't been using machine learning to do this type of analysis, but now more people are interested, and so we're excited to do this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alice. It's the time for questions. Yeah, go ahead. This is sort of like not very relevant, but out of curiosity, did you have like an exact dollar amount for each lobby bill? And were you able to identify, in addition to bill size, how expensive or progressive versus a conservative bill might be for lobby?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do have exact amounts. They are in the lobbying report. We didn't look at the amounts. Maybe we should have. But there is a cap on how much you can spend. And so the private sector pretty much maxes out. And then the citizen groups, they don't. So yeah, but it's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. One more follow-up. In this sort of like looking at the distribution of the firm size, do you see any like significant governments of like shell corporations that are set up precisely to exceed the private donation limits, or is that not a very popular practice?
What corporation?
Are there like shell corporations set up to exceed the private donation limits, or is that not?
Yeah, we haven't looked at that either, but you're bringing up like really good additional points that we should be looking at. Yeah.
I have a question. So, these interest groups are sort of branded as being sort of, in most cases, issue driven, or maybe there's a particular way that they brand themselves. I'm wondering, with your analysis, if you've looked at, or if you think it would be possible to look at whether or not that branding is sort of consistent with how they lobby. So you can imagine, like, I don't know, like an anti-abortion group that you would think would just focus on the anti-abortion groups, but because they know and come from a sort of motivation of a maybe perspective on how society should work, that they also have this sort of more clandestine, distributed lobbying pursuit that applies to bills that aren't explicitly abortion.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't have, I don't know for sure, but we do look at corporations and what they lobby on. And so, for example, like Apple Computer, I believe, at one point you can see like when they lobby on things that are not necessarily you would expect from Apple Computer. Like at one point they were doing, but it shows what they're thinking about. So they're, I forget exactly what bill, but you could tell that they're working on cars, like, self-driving cars, like before they announced that they're working on it. So you can see from these lobbying activities some of the things. And so it would be, we didn't look at the interest groups, or all of the interest groups, but that would be interesting.
Yeah, sort of like revealed versus stated preferences. I think they're putting lots of money.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Awesome.
And to be interesting to have data going back to 2009 to look at how the majority change might also affect who the firms are contacting.
Majority change meaning like who has, oh yeah.
So if you have a Democratic majority,
Yeah.
then you're more likely to be able to pass bills. So who's talking to you now?
Yeah.
Then switch to Republican. I mean, not talking to you anymore.
Right.
I mean, as a political scientist, these are answer the question.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, our political science collaborator, he has so many questions. I guess with this data set now, additionally labeled with these positions, you can ask so many different questions.
Right, well, we're right on schedule. Good job, everyone.
Thank you.
So thank